It's here. We are redefining what it means to sit at the girls' table. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Girls Table, a podcast where founders, creators, and investors share their stories. Today, I'm joined by Polina Pomopliano, who is the author of The Profile, which is a new media company that features long-form profiles of successful people and companies each week. Previously, Polina spent 5 years at Fortune, where she was the author and editor of Term Sheet, Fortune's industry-leading deal-making newsletter. Polina, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm ready to talk to you. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. And everybody looking at Polina right now, I am obsessed with how she looks. She looks awesome and so official. And then there's me, but
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, let's just start off. If you just want to give a little bit about your background, talk about where you're from and how you got started.
Well, originally, I was born in Bulgaria, and my family won a green card in the green card lottery in 1999. And then we moved to Atlanta, Georgia when I was 8 years old. And from there, I just went down the journalism path, which ultimately led me to Fortune magazine. And I thought that was my dream job because it was. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would leave that job to do something on my own, which is The Profile, which is what I do today.
And how did coming from Bulgaria and not learning English until you were in grade school affect you and your ability to then go on in a career in writing?
Yeah. So it's very interesting because you and I talked a little bit before, and I mentioned how I think that a lot of times people turn their greatest insecurities into their greatest strengths. So anytime I meet somebody and they're really, really good at something, I always ask myself, like, I wonder what happened in their past for them to become so good at this one thing. For me, even at a really, really young age, I actually learned to read really young. I was 4. My mom was just bored and she was like, I'm going to teach this child to read. So I was reading at 4. But from there, I've always loved books. I've always loved writing. And then, because to me, it was always an expression of myself. And then when we moved to Atlanta, I was like, oh no, well, this avenue of like self-expression is gone now because I don't know the language. I can't communicate. And like, what do I do? So, I mean, obviously as a kid, it's much, much easier to learn a new language because you just kind of immerse yourself into it. It wasn't until I went to school where everybody was just speaking English and I had no choice but to learn it. But it just gave me that like extra drive to be able to learn it and learn it better than my peers. And I think from there, like this love for writing just skyrocketed.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little when we spoke before, but like I was really bad at school. And then I was the same, where it was like it was an insecurity of mine. I was so bad that eventually when I switched schools, went to a different high school, I was like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes to actually do really well in school. And so it's interesting that your biggest insecurity and what you said becomes your biggest strength. And when you talk about writing, so can you discuss your writing experience and how your writing style and inspiration have changed throughout your life?
Yeah. So when I was younger, like I'm talking little kid, I would use little journals. I actually still have one from when I was 6 years old. I would use these journals to just like jot down things that I heard people around me say. It like makes no sense if you look at it. It's like a quote from someone here, then like something I was thinking about. And then the next entry is, I created a lesson plan for a school I never had. I don't know. It was just like, it was all over the place, but it showed my way of thinking. And it showed that I used writing as a way to, like, it was an outlet for creativity and self-expression, like I mentioned. So that was when I was really young. Then when I went to high school is when, this is really funny. So both of my parents are chemical engineers. So I always thought that I would do something in science or research or something like that. And I was in the science magnet program, which is like this special program at my high school with an emphasis in chemistry. I took biochemistry and organic chemistry in like 10th grade. It was insane. But I was really, really bad at it. And I was bad at the actual experiments and like the labs and all that stuff. But what I was really good at was the 15-page like lab reports that we had to do after every experiment, because it required research. It required like, figuring out how something works. But I was able to write it and clarify my thinking through my writing. So people, would hate to be in my group for doing the experiment, but they were like, hey, if you want to write the paper, totally fine. So I would do that. That then led me to joining my high school newspaper club, because I was like, I like writing and I like talking to people. So then I really like that. I think that was probably one of the most pivotal moments in my writing journey, because I realized like, oh my God, I'm good at this. And I was painfully shy and introverted in high school, but writing paired with this aspect of interviewing people for my newspaper class gave me license to become more social and, talk to people, talk to strangers, and pair it with my love for writing. So what ended up happening is like, suddenly I was becoming more outgoing. I was like liking this new life. I got to learn about people and learn from people. And then I got to synthesize what they said to me into an article. So that's where it started. And then by the time I was a senior, I was like, well, that means I have to major in journalism. So I majored in journalism at the University of Georgia until I became editor-in-chief of the college paper at Georgia. And then I went to CNN and USA Today and ended up in New York City working at a small media startup. And from there, I ended up at Fortune magazine. So it's evolved in many ways, but I think probably the biggest thing was when I figured out like, oh my God, I love learning about humans and I love learning from people, and I can also write. That was perfect for me.
It's so funny because when you say it, it sounds like pretty linear. Like you started doing it in high school, then you went to college, but it's like there's obviously so many things. Like you were doing chemistry at the time that maybe you wouldn't. So how did working at Fortune eventually lead to you starting the newsletter?
Yeah. Okay. So when I thought about, even when I had settled on journalism and I really liked it, I never ever thought was that I would work at a business magazine. I knew nothing about business. I was really passionate about education, and I thought that I would cover education at like a newspaper, for example, like USA Today or something like that. But then when the opportunity came about at Fortune, I was originally hired, like you said, it was not linear. I was hired to be the audience engagement editor. So that means like posting on their social media and trying to engage the community and the readers. It did not involve me writing articles. But if you have a goal, like I was already at Fortune magazine. I was like, I'm not about to be here and not write. So I asked to mirror reporters and I wanted to help them. And it started with helping. Then an editor would be like, hey, we have this article. Do you want to work on this? And I'd be like, of course. So I weaseled my way into writing. And I think it was less that I was good, and it was more that I would always just say yes. And people knew that they could rely on me. They knew I would write it, but also because I was shadowing all these reporters, I was learning best practices. I was watching them interview other people. So I was learning and absorbing that. And I think they knew that they could trust me. So it was never obvious to me that I wanted to be a business reporter, even though that's what I became. But then you realize that no matter what industry you're in, everything's super interesting. Like you can make anything interesting. The world of business is fascinating because there's characters, there's all sorts of people that, like once you identify the key players, there's drama, there's money, there's like, all sorts of things that make for an exciting article or life. So from there, at one point I asked myself, I was like, oh my God, I am writing about people starting businesses, but I've never done that myself. And I think that that's where I realized like, oh, maybe with the profile, I could do both.
I'm laughing because I was just listening to you and your husband on a podcast together, and he was saying that you can make anything sound interesting. Like you could talk to a worm and you could make it. So you're saying like, oh, like business is really interesting. I'm like, I could see that where you could take like any subject. And I think that makes the best writers. It's like everybody has a story, and it's like finding out that story of who made them who they are today and why they became that person. I feel like you do such a good job at that on the profile and really like finding out this information that people don't really know. So I want to jump into some of the profiles that you've done. So who are some of the individuals you have actually written for, and which individuals have inspired you the most?
Oh man, the first one that comes to mind is Lindsay Addario. She is a war photojournalist. So she's covered in the last 20 years of her career, basically every major humanitarian conflict on the planet. She's been there taking photos and interviewing people. She's been kidnapped twice. It's really, really incredible. And then a lot of her, as a result of her photography and her storytelling, there have been laws that have been changed. There's been actual impact. And I think that that's true journalism, right? It's not the clickbait we see online. It's not the think pieces. It's the heavy, like investigative journalism people do and risk their lives for on a daily basis. And I think to me, her story hit me so hard because she does this for her job. So like literally she lays her life on the line because it is her job, but she wouldn't do anything else. And I think that I'm most inspired by those people who, you know, they could be doing anything else. I mean, she could be a food photographer, but this is what she chose. And I'm really, really inspired by people who can take what is going on in the world, and it's so complex and so complicated, and distill it down to people like me who are curious and interested about what's going on, but don't exactly understand it. And she explains it in a way through visual storytelling that anybody can understand and feel on an emotional level.
And after doing Lindsay's profile, what lessons did you take from that? And did you implement anything into your writing style and the way you do profiles kind of moving forward?
The biggest thing I learned from her was that no matter where you are, even if your country is at war or you're living in extreme poverty, we're all, as humans, we share this love for celebrating like small things, and that brings us together, and it's like kind of our collective shared humanity. So she says that, you know, even in the middle of a war zone where everybody's supposed to be really upset and scared and fearful, there's still weddings, there's still birthdays, there's still people celebrating these like mundane things that we all go through. But you don't think of that. You don't think of people in a war zone like being happy. And I think her point is humans will always be humans. Like this will not take away from our shared humanity. And the way it affected me is that I always keep that in mind. Like no matter what's going on in the world, there's always this element of like life will go on, and it does go on. So I think that's really like powerful.
I love that. I've traveled a lot to like developing countries, and it's not the same as obviously being in a war zone, but you see these people who have nothing. Like they're living in shacks, they're living on the street. And a lot of times I'll pay attention to like the kids and the families and how just like they actually have nothing, and they're just like playing around and they're laughing and they're just enjoying those little things. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we're so like intertwined with our own life and everything we need or that we have. And it's like taking a step back and being like, hey, there's still happiness even if you have nothing. And I feel like that
probably more happiness.
Yeah, honestly. Get me off the computer, off my phone. So
Exactly.
So how do you choose which individuals to actually profile?
Yeah. So I start with asking myself the question, like, what do I want to learn this week? And then I back into who would be the best person to fit that topic, or the best person to teach me about this. Even if I don't have personally like access to the person, I can still dive deep into podcasts they've done, documentaries, video interviews, and extract what they say and learn from them. And the beauty of doing this is that you can learn from two totally different people. For example, there's David Goggins on one end, who's like an extreme athlete, and he's very bombastic and very particular in the way that he shares his message. And then on the other end is somebody like Cheryl Strayed, who's an author of the book Wild, and she hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. And they both have something to teach me, even though their life philosophies could not be further apart. And I love that, because then you're able to take what you want or what you can learn from each, but then also see the drawbacks of certain life choices they're making or certain things that they're doing, and then decide for yourself. Because I always ask myself, like, whenever you see this successful person, quote unquote, always ask yourself, would you want to be that successful if you've had to give up the same things they've had to give up, make the same mistakes they've had to make, not like miss out on seeing your family and your kids grow up to get to that level? With the good always comes the bad. And I'm very, very mindful of that. And that's why I always say that whenever I learn from these individuals, it's always about learning, and it's not about idolizing.
It's so easy to look at people like the ultra successful, the billionaires of the world, and just be like, wow, I want that life. And that's so true. We're like, it takes a lot, like, especially celebrities, I feel like are a great example, where you look at them and you're like, they have it all and they're so successful. Then you're like, wait, they legitimately have no privacy. They can't even step outside without people idolizing them and wanting to take pictures and wondering what their life is. And then it's like, do you really want that? Or do you just like the idea of that for 1 second?
Exactly.
And also, I love David Goggins, by the way. It Can't Hurt Me is one of my favorite books.
He's incredible. There's so much to learn there, but there's also so much to unpack of, like, he's kind of been, up until this point, I don't know now, but led a very solitary life. So it's like, yes, he's incredibly successful, but to get there, he's had to be on his own in order to achieve that. So if you don't define what success actually means to you, then if you had that life, you might be really miserable.
Can I ask you what success is to you?
The way I define success is basically somebody who has achieved something that they've always aspired to achieve, then failed miserably, then learned from that failure, and then achieved again. But the second time they achieve is with all the learnings and all the experiences they've had in those missteps. Because I think the people who struggle the most are the people who hit it once, and then they're so scared of losing it. They're so scared of any sort of failure that they end up kind of like locked in, a prison of their own making, because they're afraid to take risks now. And to me, it's not the traditionally the way we define success traditionally is some sort of measure of status or money or wealth or whatever. I measure success as like more holistically. Are you happy in the life that you live? And are the things that are important to you, do they measure up to what your standards are? Because, for example, to me, I wouldn't feel successful if I was 1000% just focused on my career and just shoved my family life aside. To me, it's both. And I've created a life where I can have achievement and success in both.
Yeah, and you mentioned when you talked about success, that part about failure. So was there a point either during your career and your life where you actually felt this a lot and you had to kind of grow from this, change something that you were doing and ultimately being able to succeed?
Yeah, and it's one of the frameworks of my life now. It's helped shape, because when I graduated from college, I let people kind of inflate my ego a little bit and fan the flames of, oh, you've done all these amazing internships. You were the editor-in-chief of the college paper. You double major, like all the things that on paper look amazing. And I let people tell me that, of course you're going to be successful. And of course you're going to get this amazing job right out of graduation. And when that didn't happen and I graduated with no full-time offers, actually 0 job offers in general, and I had to move back home with my mom, live on her couch. I was like the stereotype, and people would be like, haha, the meme of like living in your parents' basement. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like that's me. But I think that was a huge ego check. And it was the one thing that really humbled me, because for the first time in my life, I did not have any sort of identity other than my own name. So the thing that I say now is like, make sure that you never tie your identity around something external that could be taken away from you. So whether that's a job, a relationship, some sort of title, like when we're going through school, even if we're not doing anything, you're always a student. You're always an 8th grader or a 9th grader or whatever. Then in college, like I had all these identities. I was a student. I was an editor. I was an intern. I was like all these things. And then I graduated and I'm like, wait, what am I now? So it forced me to kind of be entrepreneurial and find ways to make it work. I reached back out to my former bosses at my internships, and I was like, hey, the holidays are coming up. Like, do you need any help? So I was freelancing for both CNN and USA Today, working remotely in 2013. Yeah, 2013, before remote work was a thing. But it was great because I was able to control my own schedule. I developed discipline in working on my own. I had to structure my day, like wake up, work out, log in to USA Today, or drive to CNN because CNN was in Atlanta. And I would structure my day like that, which ultimately ended up really helpful when I quit Fortune to work on the profile full time, because suddenly I was at home again, and I needed to create that structure in my life. So although it doesn't look like a massive failure, it's probably the time in my life where I felt the least confident and the most kind of lost, was that period of time where I didn't have an identity to fall back on. But it taught me when I got to Fortune, never tie your identity around a title that, like, at Fortune, I was at one point like the deputy editor of whatever. And like that, some people would be so proud of for years to come. To me, that was just like my title at work. And the reason I left and it didn't shatter my entire self-worth is because I knew I was doing the profile for myself under my own name. So I never got that like attached to it.
There's so many people now, and I could say myself included, that say like my identity is my job. So when I ask you like, what is your identity now? What would you say?
Yeah, I love this question because it's multiple things. When I'm talking to you, my identity may be author of my book Hidden Genius. When I'm talking to somebody else, my identity may be founder and writer of the profile. To somebody else, it may be I recently did an interview with a newsletter about moms. For that newsletter, my identity was mom. So it was like so cool because you don't have to identify as one thing. And I actually think that a lot of my friends who have recently had kids, it's so interesting to watch because up until this point, they're, career women, very ambitious, etc. And they are still that after having a child. But it's interesting to see the outside world trying to pin them down into like, no, but like, you're a mom now. Like, you're a mom now is trying to shut down a lot of like, yes, but I want to do that. The reason I kept the book secret for so long and I didn't tell anybody I was writing it until I announced it that it was available for pre-sale is because I didn't want to hear that. And I didn't want to hear, enough of it came from like family and friends who knew, but the question I would always get is like, okay, but you have a newborn. How are you writing a book? Like, how do you have time for that? And it, we didn't have help. It was me and the baby and the book and my husband. But the point is that like you don't have to confine your identity into these things that people are telling you, like it's impossible to do both.
And I want to get into your book, but I want to ask you one last question about the profile before we dive in. Was there anybody that you had one thesis going in and then you did research and then came out and you thought about them completely differently?
Yes. Actually, great timing on this question because right now I'm working on a profile dossier, which is what I call these deep dives that I do for these people on Danielle Steele. She is a best-selling author. She primarily writes romance novels. And you may, if you haven't read one of her books, you've probably seen one of the adaptations, like for the movies that they've informed. But she's such a fascinating person, and I had no idea. All I knew is that she was very prolific. I think she's written more than 180 books, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of them have been bestsellers. She works on a book for 2 to 3 years. Once she's done, she's on to the next one. And at first I was like, wow, how cool is that? And then I started like diving deeper and deeper. And it's very interesting to understand how she uses writing as an escape. And it's a form of escapism that's really interesting. So most people, there's this like trope of the alcoholic writer, right? Like, the writer is lonely, therefore they turn to alcohol and like all these like different, drugs of choice to numb their feelings or to to escape from this reality to something else. And she, though, has been through a lot of tragedy in her life. But when people are praising her working 20 hours a day, it's because they're like, wow, look at the amazing work that she produces that we can enjoy. But to me, reading that, it makes me think like I think she's using writing as a form of escape because she writes fiction and you can create these worlds and these characters that are kind of divorced from your reality in a way to escape what's going on in her life. So after reading about her, she's been married and divorced 5 times. She has 9 kids. And the one thing that really, really affected her, understandably so, is her teenage son committed suicide. And from there, she wrote a book about him in his honor. But she often says, like, people think I lead this glamorous life, but I'm actually she's a recluse. She's lonely. She spends a lot of time by herself, and she spends a lot of time writing, which is fantastic because she's doing something productive, but is it healthy? I don't know. So it's like that's an example of a person like you can learn a lot from, but you can also learn a lot about like, wait, am I using writing in that way? When am I the most creative? Is it when like there's darkness in my life? So it's very interesting because I'm learning from her a lot about the things that I do want to do, but a lot about like the things maybe I don't want to do.
And I feel like that must happen with a lot of different profiles that you end up doing, where you must go in one way and then you learn about them. Like everybody's had tragedy, everybody's had challenges, but then like they're highlighted when you really dive into it. And so, wow, that's really interesting. And now I want to jump into your book. So you are writing a book. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So what was the reasoning? Why did you ultimately decide to take the profile, still doing the profile weekly, by the way, you never miss one Wednesday, but then going to actually writing a book?
Yeah. Well, so the profile I started in February of 2017. So in 2 weeks, it's going to be, I guess, 6 years. 6 years? 7 years? No, 7 years. No. 6. Can you tell math is not my strong suit? Yeah. It'll be 6 years, and I started writing the profile every Sunday. So I have not missed a Sunday. And then 2 years ago, I added the dossier, which is every Wednesday. So technically, I was writing 2 things a week when I started writing the book. And I mean, looking back now, I myself am confused as to how I was able to do all of it. And just because it's a lot of writing, right? Like, it's not like one is a different type of activity. I didn't have much, you would have to context switch, but the format is the same. So I did reach a point where I felt like completely uninspired writing the profile, but I had to just change certain things in my day to make it less of a burden of like, I'm going to sit here for 4 hours and just write. So the book came about because I had never actually thought about writing a book, as crazy as that may sound. I always thought of myself as a short form journalism style person. So I never was like, oh, I'm going to write a long book about something. But then in the beginning of 2021, an editor from Harriman House, this publishing house in London, reached out to me and he said, I recently read one of your dossiers that I write for the profile, and he really liked it. And then he said, if your thoughts ever turn to writing a book, let us know. And I was like, what? Well, I was honestly just out of curiosity. I did the call with him. And never did I think, because at the time I did have a 3-month-old baby that wasn't sleeping. So not only was I sleep deprived, I was just like not in a place where I thought I had the time. But then he said, it's okay. I mean, you can just literally start with just send us a book proposal, just like of a summary of what you think the book could be about. So I sent it to him and he was like, the editors really like this. And I was like, oh no, I might actually have to write this. So it was like piece by piece. And then once the editors liked it, then I wrote a table of contents with all the chapters that I thought I could do. And the beauty of the book is that it's not one long book about one topic. There's an overarching theme about finding your hidden genius, but every chapter is kind of like a few short articles packaged together. So yeah, it looks like a book, but to me in my head, the way I was writing it was like short article, short article, short article, and then it turned into a book.
Yeah, so give us some snippets. What if we pick up the book, what should we expect?
So basically the entire book is comprised of 10 chapters, and each chapter focuses on a different aspect of your life that once you read it together, could help you find your own hidden genius. And the way I define hidden genius is a framework, a tidbit, a small piece of wisdom that you've learned from your own unique experience that you can share with the world that only you possess because you're like the expert on that thing. So there's 10 chapters. One is on leadership, another one's on creativity, a third one's on relationships. It basically, it covers a lot of ground, but at the end, I condense every single chapter into 10 questions that will help you narrow down what your own hidden genius is. And I think essentially, if you think about why I write the profile every week, it's to study individuals and extract practical lessons from them that we can all apply to our lives. And that's exactly what this book is about.
Now, you once said that you want to improve readers' content diets because what we put in our brains is just as important as what we put in our bodies. So can you elaborate more on why you believe it's so important to be aware of what we consume and how this has affected then the books and the profiles that you do?
Yes. So there was this period of time where I was just binging on reality TV shows. And I'm talking like trashy, like The Bachelorette, Love is Blind, like all of it. And
I don't see that because of just like...
Oh, yeah. No, it's great. But here's the thing, like it's okay to do that as part of your overall content diet or the content that you consume. But when it becomes dangerous is if that's the bulk of your diet. So what happened to me is that I realized how I was so affected by the things that I was watching that it literally started altering my the way I view the world. Suddenly, the way I was viewing everything was through the lens of relationships. It was like, oh my God, my friend didn't text me back in 3 hours. Does this mean she's mad at me? My husband did this. Does this mean? And it's like, hold on a second. Like, why are you falling into these crazy like thought patterns? Well, it's probably because the content that you're putting into your mind is that.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started reading things that were much better, just objectively, but also long form articles on individual people, everything shifted in that my content diet was more balanced in a way that I saw the world more objectively and less skewed than if you're just on one particular topic all the time. This is kind of random, but as an aside, I was watching an interview that Prince Harry did recently, and he mentioned how through his whole experience with the tabloids and the press and the UK and all that, he himself has improved his own content diet because he's become more mindful about what he reads and what he believes. So basically, it's like junk in, junk out. And if you read better stuff, your brain the quality of your thinking improves, and you're better able to think more clearly and communicate more clearly.
So what is kind of your favorite books that you'd recommend people either read, or is there any podcast or obviously different newsletters that you tend to look at every day to really get your content?
There's so many. So many. I still, on the newsletter side, I read everything from, and that's the other thing, right? Like diversity in content is also very important, so that you can see what people are saying from all walks of life instead of just putting blinders on and only reading one source of information. So I read everything from PitchBook, which is a newsletter on investing and deals, to the Broadsheet, which is Fortune's newsletter on women in power, to a newsletter on grief that I love called My Sweet Dumb Brain. Like, those are three very different sources of content, but I enjoy each one for a different purpose. Then in terms of books, I read so many that I do only read nonfiction. Majority of my life I've read nonfiction, but I really like biographies, memoirs, and books like Atomic Habits by James Clear and The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. If you don't read it for the content, which the actual content is amazing, read it for the writing. Because to me, Morgan Housel probably is one of the best, most clear, most succinct writers on this planet. I mean, that's a big thing, but like, I really believe it. There is no other person whose writing I read where I get like writer envy. He's just so clear and anybody can understand it. And that's a talent. That's a skill that not everybody has. So there's a lot to learn. If you want to become a better writer, start reading better writing. And one time I met with James Clear and he told me that his writing always suffers if he's not reading enough. So he's like, anytime I don't have ideas or, I'm feeling uninspired, that just means that I need to read more. So as long as you're reading anything, that's a plus, but basically try to vary your diet and try to elevate the sources of information that you read.
I'm gonna say I'm the same. I love biographies, and then I also love like Power of Habit, which obviously is different than Atomic Habit, but I feel like they have the same message. Is some of my favorites. And then exactly. I know you mentioned once that one of your favorite quotes is actually from How I Met Your Mother, which I was really a fan of too. And you said, the great moments of your life won't necessarily be the things you do, but they'll also be the things that happen to you. Now, I'm not saying you can't take action to affect the outcome of your life. You have to take action, and you will. But never forget that on that day, you can step out the front door and your whole life can change forever. So was there a specific time you felt like you took a step and your life was changed forever?
Yes. So I love this quote because it gets to the essence of serendipity. Basically, everything that we do, we're doing, but the most amazing moments in our lives often start with something super mundane. you're just like walking your dog and you bump into someone and you end up like marrying that person, like those kinds of things. Now, do we ascribe value to them, you know, when in hindsight? Sure, when looking back. But I love the idea of going about your day totally normal, and then it takes a turn for the extraordinary. So an example of this that I still remember is when I was 8. My dad picked me up from school in Bulgaria, and we were walking back. We lived in this apartment building on the first floor, and we're walking back to the building, and the neighbor is on their balcony, and they were like, "Hey, we got your mail. We accidentally got your mail today. So like, here's this package that we got." And I was next to my dad, and he opens it, and it's like this thick envelope. And he's like, he's reading it, but like, you can tell that he's in shock. And then he's like, "Oh my God, like, what?" And he can't believe, but that was he had applied for so many years to the green card lottery. And that was saying like, "Hey, you won, basically, come to the US consulate for an interview, et cetera, et cetera." But he just like could not believe that he won the green card. So then from there, we didn't have like a home phone at the time. So we walked to a payphone, and he called my mom at work to tell her. And it was that moment, like I will never forget. I was recently talking to him about it. I was like, "Do you remember that?" He was like, "Yes," because it was a totally normal day. And just think about all the things that could have gone wrong, where like I would not end up here talking to you today if that person that got our mail that day just threw it in the trash, or like didn't know that we live next door. Like it's a whole thing. But it's these small little fortunate events that lead you to where you are.
That just gave me goosebumps, because like thinking that your neighbor got the most probably important package of your life, and they
Yes.
really could have easily, like there's been a time where like somebody got packaged and they never do anything. Like that definitely happens, because they're like, "Oh, we don't know those people, whatever." Like, so that just like gives a good sense in case they just decided like, "Hey, this is important, whatever." Wow.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
So I want to end it with, what is one piece of advice that either you learned throughout your career and doing the profiles, or just any advice that you have for the people listening today? And I just want to say, I could keep talking to you for hours. I feel like you have so much knowledge and are so interesting, but obviously not going to take up all of your day.
No, this is great. No, this is awesome. It's a great conversation. And so there's two things that immediately come to mind. One is that, like we mentioned earlier, in order to not get boxed into a certain identity, you need to do something solely for yourself. And when I say that, I don't mean like go start a company. I mean like start doing something tiny outside of your day job that you solely do for you. I remember when I talked to Amelia Boone. She is a very like decorated Tough Mudder champion. She works as a lawyer for Apple, a corporate attorney. And I'm like, "Why don't you quit your job and just do the Tough Mudder thing full time? Like, you're so talented, you're so good." And she was like, "No, because that is something that I do for myself. And if I turn it into a job, I'm not going to enjoy it as much." So there's that line of thinking. And I think that's very valid. And, you know, if you can do that, where you can separate your working life from your personal life in that way, that's amazing. Then there's other people who would love to turn the thing that they love most into their job. But you don't need to know that when you're first starting. So for me, when I started the profile as an email in 2017, Substack like didn't exist. There were no paid newsletters that reporters were quitting their jobs over to go work at. So when I started it just for pure like personal pleasure. I was like, I'm going to send this email to family and friends. They'll enjoy it. We can have better conversations as a result. And when 2020 came and like the rise of the passion economy, I just happened to have been doing it for 3 years, and to see like, oh my God, wait, I think there is a place for this. And I think that this could make money. And luckily, I had spent the last few years earning the trust of the people who would eventually pay me to do this work. So the things that you start today, like you don't have to know how or even whether it will make money or be a business, but you can make yourself luckier in the future if you start doing something and then give yourself optionality to explore it in the future. The top paying Substack or newsletter on Substack is about salads. Like, that's so niche and it's so specific, but
Wait, is it actually?
yes, it's incredible. Thousands of people pay for this content on salads. And I think that that's the beauty of this stuff. The more niche it is, in my opinion, the better, because people will find value because that's exactly what they're searching for. And then the second thing that I've learned is that you can always reinvent yourself. If there's like one thing that I took away from all these people, is that at some point in their lives, something happens, and whether they lose it all or they think they can never go on again. I mean, Martha Stewart went to prison. She came out, then she started working with Snoop Dogg, and she's the queen of reinvention, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic. But I'm just saying, like, if you don't like your current life or your current identity or whatever, like, you can reinvent certain aspects of it and do something new or learn something more or become somebody else in a way. And then I'll end with a third thing. The third thing I learned is that the most successful people bet on themselves. It's never, they're never leaving their destinies in the hands of somebody else. They're always like, I'm willing to bet on myself and take a risk and, trust that I have the skill set necessary to succeed in this field or on this path. And then they go do it. And whether they fail absolutely miserably or they succeed, those are the only two options when you bet on yourself. But I think that what separates like the 1% from everybody else, it's that.
And I think, like, by you starting the profile, like, you kind of took all those pieces of advice, but, like, you didn't necessarily make it your career first. You started writing the profile. You didn't bet on yourself until you ended up just making this hobby out of a career, and then you were able to actually take that leap. And look at you now. I feel like you're such an inspiration.
There's so much to do. So much to do.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for your book to come out. I saw your tweet about you doing the Audible as well. I'm such a Walker and Audible listener. So what is the official date? I think it's June, right?
June 20th. Yes.
I can't wait. So for everybody listening, definitely look at Polina. She is so amazing. Subscribe to her newsletter as well. Polina, where can people find you today?
Honestly, anywhere. I'm kidding. You can find me on the best place is theprofile.substack.com, which is where my newsletter is.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. This was great. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. Bye.